Rebecca Hamilton had a habit of checking on her son Ethan's room first thing when she woke up at 6 in the morning. Her 8-year-old boy always slept curled up with the blanket pulled over his head. Seeing his peaceful sleeping face helped ease the fatigue from her long hospital shift the night before. "Ethan, it's time to wake up." When she gently shook his shoulder, her son slowly opened his eyes. His large brown eyes were inherited from his father, and his gentle nature resembled her husband Michael as well. Ethan never caused trouble with friends at school and was rather introverted, preferring to read books. His teacher had praised him as a very thoughtful and kind child. "Good morning, Mom." Rebecca smiled at her son's small voice. Her husband Michael had already started making breakfast, and the aroma of bacon was drifting from the kitchen. Michael worked as an engineer at a local construction company and had met Rebecca during their college years. He was an ideal husband who actively helped with housework and childcare. "Wasn't today the day to visit your mother's place?" Michael asked, turning around. "That's right. Our monthly tradition," Rebecca replied with a wry smile. Rebecca's family home was about a 20-minute drive away. Her mother Dorothy had strong convictions about her grandson's education, drawing from her 40 years of experience in children's education. Even after retirement, Dorothy remained active in community volunteer work and was respected by neighbors as a reliable person. "Are you looking forward to Grandma's house?" Rebecca asked Ethan, and her son nodded vaguely. At the family home, her sister Jessica also lived with her son Braden. Jessica had divorced 2 years ago and returned to their parents' home with 10-year-old Braden. Braden was an active boy who excelled at sports. He played as a key player on the local Little League team and was Jessica's pride and joy. "You'll have fun playing with Braden, won't you?" Rebecca said, stroking her son's head. Dorothy always said, "Boys need boyfriends," and encouraged Ethan and Braden to play together. Indeed, for Ethan, who was an only child, time spent with his cousin was precious. Dorothy loved her grandsons dearly and would bake homemade cookies and wait for them when they came to visit. After finishing breakfast, Rebecca put Ethan in the car and headed to her family home. On the way, her son unusually said, "Please come pick me up early today." "Why? Did something happen?" "Nothing. I just thought so," Ethan replied quietly, looking out the window. When they arrived at the family home, Dorothy was waiting at the entrance. With her gray hair neatly arranged and wearing an apron, the grandmother looked exactly like the ideal grandma. "Ethan, come to Grandma." Dorothy hugged her grandson and then said to Rebecca, "Please come pick him up by this afternoon. I'm planning to take them to the park with Braden." "Thank you, Mom. That's a big help." Rebecca headed to her morning shift at the hospital. Working in the pediatric ward at St. Mary's General Hospital, she was a nurse trusted by colleagues and patients' families alike. Throughout her 12-year career, she had been passionate about easing children's pain and anxiety. During her shift, Rebecca found herself thinking about Ethan's behavior. Recently, he often seemed listless when he returned from her family home. She had thought he was just tired, but this morning's words, "Please come pick me up early," bothered her. When she left the hospital at 2 in the afternoon, Rebecca headed to her family home. Opening the front door, she could hear Dorothy and Jessica's laughter coming from the living room. The two were drinking tea and talking about Braden's achievements at school. "Welcome back," Jessica said, turning around. Her sister seemed to have lost some weight since the divorce, but she still showed her usual bright smile. "Where's Ethan?" Rebecca asked, and Dorothy pointed to the yard. "He's playing outside with Braden. Boys need to play energetically outdoors." When Rebecca went out to the yard, she could see Braden kicking a soccer ball. However, Ethan was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Ethan?" she asked Braden, and the boy shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know. He was here just a minute ago." Just then, Ethan slowly emerged from behind the house. Her son's clothes were dirty and his hair was disheveled. But what surprised Rebecca even more was Ethan's expression. His usual gentle smile was gone, and his eyes looked somehow frightened. At dinner that evening, Ethan was quieter than usual. Even when Michael talked about work or Rebecca asked about school events, her son's responses were short, and he kept his eyes downcast. "What did you do at Grandma's house today?" Rebecca asked gently, and Ethan paused before answering. "We went to the park." "Did you have fun playing with Braden?" Ethan nodded vaguely, but his expression lacked its former brightness. Rebecca became worried but told herself he was probably just tired. The following week, when she went to drop off her son at her family home again, Dorothy greeted her grandson at the entrance and said, "This child is really too quiet. I wish he would become more active, like Braden." Rebecca smiled and replied, "Ethan has a naturally gentle personality. That's his individuality. But boys need to be strong. The world is harsh." Dorothy's voice carried the conviction she had developed over her years as a teacher. When she finished her hospital shift and went to pick him up, this time too Ethan's clothes had small stains. The knee area was lightly soiled, and there were mud-like marks on his sleeves. "Did you fall?" Rebecca asked, and Ethan nodded slightly. In the car on the way home, Rebecca talked to her son while keeping an eye on his condition. "You can tell Mom anything if you're having any trouble." Ethan stared out the window and answered in a thin voice, "I'm okay." However, that night, Ethan woke up crying from a nightmare. When Rebecca rushed to him, her son clung to her while trembling. "Did you have a scary dream?" "I don't remember," Ethan answered tearfully. The next morning, Michael said to Rebecca, "Hasn't Ethan been acting strange lately? It seems like he's always listless when he comes back from your family home." "I felt that way too. But maybe he's just tired from playing with Braden." "Maybe so, but..." Michael frowned with concern. The next weekend, Rebecca called Jessica before visiting her family home. "Please let me know if you notice anything concerning about Ethan's behavior." Her sister answered in a light voice, "Don't worry. It's normal for boys to play a little rough with each other, isn't it? Braden was gentle with him at first, but since Ethan is so quiet, he seems to be giving him a little stimulation." "Stimulation? Getting stronger through play." "Mom says the same thing. She says Ethan needs a slightly tougher environment." Rebecca felt something bothering her, but she didn't argue with her sister's words. That day, she noticed a small bruise on Ethan's right arm when he returned from her family home. "What's this?" Rebecca asked, gently taking her son's arm. "Playing with Braden." "What kind of play?" Ethan hesitated. "Just regular play." Rebecca called her family home. When Dorothy answered the phone, Rebecca asked about the bruise on her son's arm. "Oh, that. They were playing wrestling. Boys used to play much more roughly in the old days. Maybe today's children are too overprotected. But Ethan doesn't like that kind of play. That's exactly why it's necessary. We need to help him break out of his shell. Braden is playing the role of a good big brother." After hanging up the phone, Rebecca felt conflicted. Her mother's words seemed to make some sense, but remembering her son's expression made her increasingly anxious. The day before their next visit to her family home, Ethan said with unusual firmness, "Next time, I want to go to the park with Dad." "Why? Isn't Grandma's house fun?" Ethan fell silent. Rebecca knelt down to meet her son's eyes. "Is something unpleasant happening?" "Not really. I just want to play with Dad." Michael entered the living room and had heard the conversation. "I'd like to spend time with my son too. I'll watch him next time." However, when Rebecca conveyed this to Dorothy over the phone, she objected. "I only get to see my grandson once a month, don't say such things. Besides, Braden is waiting for Ethan too." Rebecca was persuaded by her mother's words and ended up dropping off her son at her family home as usual. That morning, Ethan clearly said, "I don't want to go," for the first time. Why? Just because. While Rebecca persuaded her son, she felt an alarm bell ringing deep in her heart. However, her promise to her mother and desire to maintain family harmony won out. When they arrived at her family home, Brayden came running energetically. "Ethan, I'll teach you a new game today." Ethan backed away and hid behind Rebecca. This was a reaction from her son she had never seen before. "It's okay, Ethan. Have fun playing with Brayden," Dorothy said, pushing her grandson's shoulder. As Rebecca headed to the hospital, she couldn't get her son's frightened expression out of her mind. When she consulted with a colleague nurse, she answered with a serious expression. "Children's intuition is sharper than adults. Please value your son's feelings." In the afternoon, as the time to pick him up approached, Rebecca's anxiety increased. When she called her family home, Jessica answered. "How's everything today? Is everyone doing well?" "Yes, the children are playing in the yard. But. Ethan cried a little. "But it's okay," he was smiling again right away. Rebecca's heart began to race. "He cried. Why?" "He just fell down. Boys fall often, don't they?" Mom also said, "He's no good if he cries over something like this." After hanging up the phone, Rebecca hurried out of the hospital. While driving, she recalled her son's recent changes. His listless expression, the dirty clothes, the bruise on his arm, and this morning's words, "I don't want to go." All of these seemed to be crying out something to her. When Rebecca rang the doorbell, Dorothy appeared. Her hair was neatly arranged as usual and she wore a clean apron, but there was a slight tension visible in her expression. "Welcome back, Rebecca. You're a bit late. There was an emergency at the hospital." "Where's Ethan?" "He's in the living room." "But." Dorothy started to say something and then closed her mouth. When Rebecca entered the living room, she saw Ethan sitting on the sofa. Her son's face was swollen more than she had ever seen, his left cheek was bright red, and there was a small bleeding wound on the left side of his forehead. "Ethan." Rebecca rushed to her son, knelt down, and hugged him. Ethan's small body was trembling and felt hotter than usual. "What happened? What's going on?" Ethan buried his face in his mother's chest and answered in a trembling voice, "I fell down, outside." Rebecca gently lifted her son's face and checked the condition of his wounds. The swelling on his left cheek was clearly from a blow, and the wound on his forehead looked like it was made by something sharp hitting him. From her experience as a nurse, it was clear this wasn't from a simple fall. "Mom, what is this about?" Rebecca stood up and turned to face Dorothy. Dorothy showed a confused expression and answered, "He fell while playing in the yard. Brayden came running to tell us." "This much swelling doesn't happen from just falling," Rebecca's voice trembled. Just then, Jessica appeared from the kitchen. Her face was pale, and the teacup in her hand was slightly shaking. "Rebecca, don't make such a big deal of it. Children fall often. Brayden has had much worse injuries." "Where is Brayden?" Rebecca asked, staring at her sister. "In his room. He got scared by all this commotion." Rebecca checked Ethan's wounds again. The forehead wound was deeper than she had thought and needed proper treatment. "I'm taking him to the hospital." "That's not necessary," Dorothy said frantically. "Just disinfect it and put on a bandage. I've been watching children for 40 years. Mom, this isn't from a normal fall. I'm saying this as a nurse." Rebecca's voice was calm, but anger was burning inside her. While putting Ethan in the car, Rebecca called her family home. When Dorothy answered, she asked while suppressing her emotions. "Mom, what really happened? What were you doing while Ethan got injured this badly?" After a brief silence on the other end of the phone, Dorothy answered, "He just fell, didn't he?" "You're being dramatic." With those words, something changed decisively inside Rebecca. Her mother was trivializing her grandson's injury and trying to hide the truth. After hanging up the phone, Rebecca drove to the hospital while holding her son's hand. When they arrived at the emergency department of St. Mary's General Hospital, colleague nurses rushed over with concern. Dr. Johnson, the attending physician, was a trustworthy colleague from Rebecca's workplace. "Rebecca, what happened to your son?" "I was told he was injured at my family home. They said he fell, but..." Dr. Johnson laid Ethan on the examination table and began carefully checking the condition of his wounds. Rebecca held his hand while encouraging her son. "It's okay, Ethan. The doctor will take care of you." The doctor examined the facial swelling, forehead wound, and the condition of his arms and legs in detail. During this time, Ethan gripped his mother's hand tightly. After about 15 minutes of examination, Dr. Johnson's expression changed. He gave some instructions to the nurse and then called Rebecca to a separate room. "Rebecca, I need to talk to you about your son's injuries." Rebecca's heart pounded violently at the doctor's serious expression. "What your son received wasn't from a fall," Dr. Johnson said quietly but clearly. "What do you mean?" "Look at the pattern of facial swelling. This is clearly from being struck. If it were a fall, there would mainly be scrapes, but this is bruising from a blunt object." Rebecca was speechless. The doctor continued. "Furthermore, there are also traces of old bruises on his arms and legs. These appear to be from several days to a week ago. There's a possibility he was receiving continuous violence." "Continuous?" Rebecca's voice was hoarse. "The forehead wound also can't be explained by a fall. It appears he was hit with something hard or something was thrown at him." Rebecca slumped into the chair in the examination room. All of her son's changes, his condition when returning from her family home, the dirty clothes, the bruise on his arm, everything connected. "We need to hear the details from your son." However, children sometimes hide the truth to protect adults. "Let's approach this carefully." When they returned to the examination room with the doctor, Ethan looked up at his mother anxiously. Rebecca took her son's hand and spoke gently. "Ethan, will you tell Mom the truth? No one will be angry. Mom is here to protect Ethan." Ethan trembled slightly while looking into his mother's eyes. "Really won't be angry?" "Absolutely won't be angry. I promise." Her son began to speak in a small voice. "At Grandma's house." "Brayden. What happened?" Rebecca gently encouraged while holding her son's hand. "We were playing at first. But when I couldn't do it well, Big Brother got angry and hit me." Rebecca's heart felt like it stopped. "Today too?" Ethan nodded. "When I cried, he got even angrier and threw a stone." "A stone?" "It hit my forehead and I bled. But Big Brother said, 'Tell Grandma you fell.'" Rebecca hugged her son while desperately trying to hold back tears. Weren't Grandma or Aunt Jessica watching? Grandma was inside the house, and Aunt Jessica was on the phone. Big Brother said, "If you tell on me, I'll do something worse." Dr. Johnson quietly took notes while saying to Rebecca, "This is clearly violence against a child. After proper treatment, we need to report this to the relevant agencies." Rebecca stroked her son's head while firming her resolve. Never again would she put her son in that environment. Whether there were blood relations or not, protecting children was the top priority. "Ethan, it's okay now. Mom will protect you." Her son cried quietly in his mother's arms. From that small body, the fear and pain he had been carrying alone seemed to flow out. Before leaving the hospital, Rebecca called Michael. "Come to the hospital right away. And don't call my family home tonight." "What happened?" "I'll explain in detail later." But Ethan will never go there again. From the strength in Rebecca's voice, Michael sensed the gravity of the situation. I'm coming right now. Ethan's forehead wound required 5 stitches, and cold compresses were prescribed for the facial swelling. Dr. Johnson prepared a medical report and also explained about reporting to Child Protective Services. Please let him rest well tonight. And if your son wants to talk more, please listen to him without forcing it. In the car on the way home, Michael looked worriedly at Ethan in the back seat. Her son was sleeping, exhausted. Rebecca, this is really... Yes, exactly what we think, Rebecca answered quietly while looking ahead. Brayden had been hitting Ethan continuously. And the adults were turning a blind eye. Michael clenched his fists. Why didn't our son say anything? He was scared. He was threatened by Brayden, and he probably thought the adults wouldn't believe him. That night, after putting Ethan to bed, Rebecca and Michael talked at the kitchen table. Tomorrow, I'm going to my family home, Rebecca said resolutely. I'll find out the truth and make them take responsibility. I'll come with you, Michael said, but Rebecca shook her head. This is my family's problem. I'll settle it. The next morning, after leaving Ethan with Michael's mother in the neighborhood, Rebecca headed alone to her family home. While driving, she organized the thoughts she had been considering all night with little sleep. What to say to her mother and Jessica, how to handle it. When she arrived at her family home, Dorothy was hanging laundry in the yard. Seeing Rebecca's car, her mother's expression stiffened. Rebecca, where's Ethan? He didn't come today. I came to talk. Entering the living room, Jessica was there too. Rebecca didn't miss that the hand holding her coffee cup was slightly trembling. Let's talk about yesterday's incident, Rebecca said, remaining standing instead of sitting on the 3-seat sofa, looking down at her mother and sister. What incident? Dorothy asked. According to the doctor's diagnosis, Ethan's injuries weren't from falling. They're marks from being hit by someone. Jessica gasped. Dorothy answered without changing her expression. The doctor must be mistaken. Children's injuries are lighter than they look. Mom, Rebecca's voice was quiet but intimidating. Ethan told me everything. That Brayden was continuously violent, that he threw stones, and that he was keeping him quiet about it. Heavy silence filled the living room. Jessica covered her face with her hands, and Dorothy stubbornly stared ahead. Where is Brayden? When Rebecca asked, Jessica answered in a trembling voice. At school. When he comes back from school, I want to talk to him. Wait, Jessica stood up. It's just kid stuff, isn't it? You don't need to make such a big deal. A big deal? Rebecca's voice rose. Did you see my son's face? Do you think that's normal between kids? But Brayden isn't a bad child. He's just a little. A little what? Jessica was at a loss for words. Dorothy spoke up. Boys sometimes become rough. Brayden might be stressed because he doesn't have a father. Does that justify hitting Ethan? Rebecca stared at her mother. Mom, you were a teacher for 40 years, right? With that experience, do you think this is normal? Dorothy showed signs of upset for the first time. I wasn't watching. If something like that really happened. You weren't watching. Rebecca made an incredulous sound. Even when my son came back crying. Even when his clothes were dirty. Even when he was injured. Just then, footsteps could be heard from upstairs. Brayden was coming down the stairs. He seemed to have returned from school. The 10-year-old boy sensed the tense atmosphere among the adults and showed a wary expression. Brayden, come here, Rebecca called out. The boy looked toward his mother, but Jessica averted her eyes. Can you tell me about Ethan? Rebecca knelt down to meet Brayden's eyes. What about? Tell me what happened in the yard yesterday. He just fell, the boy answered immediately. Rebecca continued in a gentle tone. Brayden, you don't need to lie. Tell me the truth. The boy's eyes wandered. He really fell. That's different from what Ethan said. He said you threw a stone. At that moment, Brayden's expression changed. Ethan's lying. I didn't do anything. Then how do you explain Ethan's facial injury? Brayden couldn't answer and looked toward Jessica. His mother pulled her son close and said, That's enough. Stop blaming the child. I'm not blaming him. I just want to know the truth. Rebecca stood up. But if you're going to cover this up, I'll have to take other measures. What other measures? Dorothy asked. I'll officially report this to Child Protective Services. I might also consult with the police. Jessica turned pale. That's so dramatic, we're family. Because we're family, Rebecca's voice was filled with anger. If we're family, we should protect children, shouldn't we? Ethan is family too. Why won't you try to protect him? Dorothy opened her heavy mouth. Perhaps, there might have been things I overlooked. Overlooked? I had noticed that Brayden was sometimes harsh with Ethan. But I thought it was like a brotherly relationship. Violence isn't acceptable even between brothers, Rebecca said calmly. And for adults to neglect it. Jessica started crying. I had some awareness too. But considering Brayden's stress, he doesn't have a father, and things aren't going well at school. Do you think that's an excuse for him to be violent toward Ethan? Silence filled the living room again. Brayden was clinging to his mother and crying. Rebecca took a deep breath and gave her ultimatum. Listen carefully to what I'm about to say. First, Brayden must receive counseling. Explore the causes of his violent behavior and get appropriate treatment. Second, an apology to Ethan. And third, take responsibility as adults to ensure this never happens again. What if we can't do that? Dorothy asked in a small voice. I will never let Ethan come to this house again. And I'll take legal action if necessary. Jessica said tearfully, Rebecca, please. The family will fall apart. The family didn't fall apart because of me. Rebecca headed toward the entrance without looking back. The only thing I did was believe my son and try to protect him. Before opening the door, Rebecca turned around. Give me your answer by tomorrow. Whether you're willing to get counseling for Brayden. Getting into the car, Rebecca's hands were shaking. However, she also felt a sense of liberation she had never experienced before. She had said everything necessary to protect her son. There was no going back, and she didn't intend to. 3 days later, Dorothy called. Her voice sounded much smaller than before and tired. Rebecca, I need to talk to you. I've decided to get counseling for Brayden. Rebecca breathed a sigh of relief. I see. I think that's the best choice. I made an appointment at the pediatric psychiatry department at St. Mary's Hospital. We plan to start next week, Dorothy continued. I also admit that my response was wrong. As a teacher, as a grandmother, it should never have happened. For the first time, Rebecca felt sincerity in her mother's words. What about Jessica? She's going to receive counseling together with Brayden. She says she'll take responsibility as a mother for her son's behavior. 2 weeks later, Rebecca visited her family home with Michael and Ethan. Brayden was beginning to show the effects of counseling and had asked to apologize directly to Ethan. In the living room, Brayden stood in front of Ethan with a nervous expression. He did his best to convey the words he had prepared under the counselor's guidance. Ethan, what I did was really bad. I'm truly sorry for hitting you, throwing stones, and threatening you. Ethan nodded slightly while holding his mother's hand. I didn't hate you. I was frustrated because I don't have a dad and things weren't going well at school. But that wasn't your fault. I was wrong. Tears welled up in Braden's eyes. The 10-year-old boy was beginning to understand the weight of his actions in his own way. I'm learning how to control my anger in counseling now. I'll never hurt anyone again. I promise. Ethan looked up at his mother. When Rebecca smiled at him, her son answered in a small voice. Okay. But don't hit me anymore. I absolutely won't hit you, Braden answered strongly. After that, Dorothy and Jessica also apologized to Ethan. Jessica especially cried as she sincerely apologized for not being able to protect him. Ethan, I'm truly sorry that I, as your aunt, couldn't protect you. I did something unacceptable as an adult. After 3 months had passed, the family relationships began to take on a new form. Rebecca resumed her monthly visits to her family home, but now Michael always came with her. Ethan and Braden were also gradually repairing their relationship under the counselor's supervision. One Sunday afternoon, Rebecca watched Ethan and Braden quietly reading books in the yard. There was no chasing around like before, and each was spending time at his own pace. Still, when she occasionally saw Braden speaking gently to Ethan, she could feel hope. I think it will still take time, but Braden is trying to change, Jessica said, sitting next to Rebecca. That's right. But what's important is the will to change, Rebecca replied. That night, in the car on the way home, Ethan said, Mom, thank you for protecting me. Rebecca's heart warmed at her son's words. That's natural. Mom is always on Ethan's side. Next time, if something scary happens, I'll tell you right away. Please do. You can tell me anything. Michael turned around from the driver's seat and said, We're a real family. We cherish and protect each other. I think that's what family means. Rebecca nodded deeply at her husband's words. Blood relations were certainly important, but what was more important was respecting, loving, and protecting each other. Several months later, Braden's counseling was progressing well, and his relationships with friends at school had also improved. Dorothy began volunteer work related to child protection in the community, using her experience to support other families. Rebecca still visits her family home once a month, but with a different sense of security than before. Ethan also enjoys his time with his grandmother and cousin, but they have built a trusting relationship where he would immediately tell her if something happened. Rebecca deeply understood that true family is not defined by blood relations, but is built through love and respect for each other, and above all, the sense of responsibility that prioritizes children's safety and happiness.